Hello, my name is Erin Johnson. This is Think Tank Television. Welcome. And today we have as our guest a member of the Board of Selectmen in Whitman, Selectman Justin Evans. Welcome, Justin.
Thanks, Erin.
It's great to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
Okay, today we're going to talk about a really interesting post you shared with us, all over the town, really all over social media. And it's about some goals you have pertaining to reducing our carbon footprint as a community and increasing community resilience. So I don't know, I guess we'd start with why and how should we do that?
So, yeah, thanks, Erin. Yeah, I put a blog post out a little while ago, just kind of putting my thoughts together. It was easy to write the whole thing out. Mm-hmm. Around certain programs that the state has, basically to help reduce your carbon footprint as a community. And, there's a couple of reasons why we should be doing that. The main one being sort of a moral and ethical responsibility to, leave the planet better than we inherited it when we got here. That the old, I think it's Boy Scout, leave the site better than you got there. But I think it's very important that as we look around and see, wildfires on the West Coast and, increased flooding, some of the increased inland flooding from stronger rainstorms, even if they're less frequent, mm-hmm. We're starting to really see the effects. A couple of weeks ago, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released their 6th assessment that basically said, without a doubt, this is happening and we need to do something about it. And that was what really kicked off my digging into different state programs to see what I should be doing as a member of the board and really where Whitman stands compared to other communities. So that's the why. The how, I think we're going to get into in a lot of the other questions, but there's a lot of different state programs structured around this, starting back with probably before, but the first big one was the Green Communities Act back in 2008. Mm-hmm. And even more recently, there was the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program. I think it was 2017. Mm-hmm. And a whole bunch of programs there in between. Different state agencies release their own grant programs, their own incentive systems. Different utilities offer programs. So there's a lot of different structure out there scattered around. And I just wanted to wrap my head around it and kind of focus on the one goal mm-hmm. of just doing what we can as a community.
Yeah, because you hear, unfortunately, the seriousness of the climate crisis, but sometimes you hear it at a national level, and you don't really know if you're going to make changes at the local level or not. But it makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, this is where you live. So.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, a lot of the changes from the national level would be nice, but the states have been more effective recently in mm-hmm. moving some of this, and I think local communities can take that up a notch and start really changing things at the ground level.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I know you talked about some of the things at the state. So what are some of the incentives that they have for towns to actually go ahead and do some of these things?
So I mentioned the two big ones. The Green Communities Program was a program, a little over a decade ago, where communities can opt in by meeting certain criteria, updating the basic building codes to be more sustainable, guarantee that whenever you replace a vehicle, you replace it with more fuel efficient version of that vehicle. And doing meeting these criteria to join the program opens up a bunch of grant opportunities. Mm-hmm. And just for examples within the town of Whitman, we've converted all of our elementary and middle school lighting over to LED using this program. Mm-hmm. It subsidized the purchase of a couple of more fuel efficient vehicles. It's done a lot of really good things for the town on a really small level, and it was money from the state offering these incentives to help reduce our energy. The other big one would be the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program. Whitman was accepted into that in 2020, and we developed our MVP plan last year with the Old Colony Planning Council. Actually, earlier this year, we finished it. And that really outlines what this town is looking at as the effects of climate change. So if things continue in the direction we're heading, mm-hmm. what are we going to expect?
Yeah, that's a good thing. I really haven't thought of that. What will happen to our town? Exactly. I mean, we have I don't know, we have the lake by the park. I mean, what sorts of things would change, for
So
us as a community if this goes unchecked, really?
yeah, so the big things that we found in studying this with the experts, the Old Colony Planning Council, we brought in all the both chiefs, DPW superintendent, the town administrator, and left open for public comment for the community, just to kind of search what are we looking at on the municipal level. And the biggest takeaway that every participant had was the two dams in town. If we see increase in inland flooding, larger rainstorms over shorter periods of time, and either the dam at Hobart's Pond or Harding's Pond overtops or fails, we're going to see catastrophic flooding. That was the big ones. Some of the other things that we saw as threats are things that we've seen in the last couple of years, long-term power outages. So with more windstorms, potentially tornadoes, we had a downburst in the 90s. If something like that were to happen again, we could be without power for a week or two at a time, just based on where we are between the substations. So there's a couple of things there, increased droughts, longer heat waves. We looked at how each town building could serve as a cooling center or heating center if a blizzard comes and power gets knocked out. So it was a really effective study. And then the best thing about this program is going forward, now that we've completed our analysis, we can apply for action grants to address some of these concerns. Maybe make some repairs to the dam or add different, turn buildings into cooling centers that may have not had the capacity before.
Okay, that sounds good. You talked about something called municipal choice aggregation. What exactly is that?
That's something that a lot of towns near us have been looking at lately. I think Abington adopted it briefly and maybe trying to undo it now. But the short summary is that right now in Massachusetts, we've got a deregulated energy market. Any consumer can purchase electricity from anyone they want. You don't necessarily have to buy it from the person whose line connects to your house. You do this with credits, and it's a kind of a technical system, but you can do that on the municipal level as well. So the town has the ability to bargain with a company to change the default power provider. I highlighted in my post that Newton did this pretty effectively. And I think they changed I forget which company they switched to from whoever whoever owns the power lines in the town, but their default electricity was 80% renewable. And any individual customer could dial that up or down if they wanted. They offered a couple of options, or they can go back to their electric provider, or they could sign a long-term contract with a third party, somebody else. So it doesn't lock anyone into anything. Hanson is actually looking at municipal choice aggregation, if not right now, at the last town meeting. It's something that they've been discussing for a little over a year. So I think you'll see more of this coming in the community. I don't know if Whitman will go that way, but I'll start banging the drum, seeing if we can move that.
Yeah, I mean, because some of the things you talked about solar power and the electric charging stations. Some people. So I guess what kind of changes, at that level do you think will happen? What we'd like to see? I guess my point, I was like, do you really see like windmills in Whitman?
So I think you could actually see windmills over behind Peaceful Meadows and some of the industrial areas on that side of town, which is close to the National Grid substation within Whitman that feeds Brockton. So I actually think you could see some windmills there. They'd be pretty big for this area, but Situate's pulled it off. Hull has a couple of windmills, so it's not unheard of on the South Shore. Solar power, I think we really should start pushing in town. The high schools had it on the roof since 2005, but other town buildings could start sort of net metering their electricity. So if you generate a certain amount of power, it'll offset what you draw from the grid. And so if you make 10 megawatts, that you don't have to pay for another 10 megawatts down the line. It's a pretty effective system. And even if we don't produce all of our electricity locally, the thing about energy efficiency and trying to reduce how much electricity you're using is that there are losses as you transmit power. So if we are, in the past, we purchased a lot of our electricity from the Pilgrim station in Plymouth. That's now shut down. But just sending the electricity from Plymouth to Whitman, you'd lose a little bit because it's traveling a long distance over the wires. If you've got solar panels on top of Town Hall or the old armory that could feed the fire station, that doesn't have to travel as far. So you're getting all of the electricity right at the place that you're going to use it. During the day, any excess gets sent back to the grid to cover neighbors, and it's just less electrons flowing in different directions.
Okay, that sounds great too. You mentioned recycling too in your article. How does changing recycling affect the rest of this?
So there's a couple of things that go into recycling and how it affects our energy usage. The first is that if you recycle a piece of plastic or an aluminum can, that's one less can that has to be created. It takes more energy to create something new than it would to recycle something old. And that goes for reusing old things. It goes for pretty much everything down the line. But also if you look at organic waste, so like compost or something like that, anything you can divert from a landfills will tend to emit methane as stuff breaks down. You hear about this nationwide with, cow farms, with biodigesters, but any landfill, as stuff breaks down, releases methane, which is a pretty potent greenhouse gas. It holds more heat than carbon dioxide. So you want to reduce your methane emissions. So recycling just diverts, whether you're talking about the traditional recycling, the paper, metals, plastics, or you're looking at other types of recycling. In Whitman, we have textile recycling, the pink bags that you can leave out. And that just gets those, if it would otherwise go to a landfill, it sends it somewhere else. You can break down the fibers and reuse them for something else. Or if things are still in good shape, the company that we've partnered with gets it to Goodwill or a secondhand store or something to get it reused.
Okay. So I want to talk about transportation for a minute. I mentioned the charging stations and the possibility that eventually people will drive electric cars. But in the meantime, I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, everyone stopped driving and the air cleared like all over the world and the quality of the air was better. So how much will we require to stop driving and what would the alternatives be?
It's really going to be location specific. So you make a good point. The air quality cleared up. I remember seeing pictures in parts of India where you couldn't see mountains and suddenly they're there. It was really jarring. Paris, the air was clearer. Hiking, even in New York or New England, it was easier to breathe. So there are health effects that we don't really think about when we're just talking about climate change. But transportation in general is going to be kind of a region specific thing. Statewide, Massachusetts should electrify the commuter rail so that it's not running diesel engines back and forth. Not just because it's cleaner, but because it takes with a diesel locomotive, you have to turn it around. Whereas if it were an electric train, sort of like the T right now, it can just go back and forth. So rather than having these locations at the end of the line in Kingston or Plymouth to turn the train around, you could run shorter routes. So you could run from, Brockton to Boston a couple of times and then go the full length without having to get to the end of the line, turn the train around and send it all the way back. So there's efficiency that we can gain there. But beyond places that are just accessible by train, a lot of people in Whitman don't commute in and out of Boston every day.
Yeah.
So there's things that we could do to improve local transportation. Right now in town, I believe we only have 2 bike racks, and I might be wrong there. I don't know about the middle school, but the library has a bike rack and the commuter rail has a bike rack. And I don't know if you've been around the park lately, but there's a lot of kids riding bikes. It seems like a really practical thing to put a bike rack at the park on near Hobart's Pond along the boulevard, maybe one at Town Hall. And it doesn't cost a lot of money. We could probably pay for it with either Community Preservation Act money or with grants to increase biking or outdoor activities,
Yeah.
or even ask South Shore Tech to weld us a couple of interesting shapes and donate them. It's just, things like that to just reduce driving, increase telecommuting, ask workplaces to be more flexible. That's already happening. I think after the last year and a half, you see fewer people driving the office every day, and they might go in 2 or 3 days a week. But if you've ever tried to drive into Boston lately, traffic's back. It doesn't help.
Yeah.
And you'd asked about electric cars too, which is really I think it's the eye-catching thing in this area. We're getting pretty close with electric cars. Everybody knows Teslas, but like a Chevy Bolt is pretty comparable in cost to an internal combustion engine car if you buy it new, and used they're a little bit more, but not crazy expensive. And those can go for 250 miles. Now, right now they have a battery recall, so it's going to scare some people off. But there's a lot of other things coming down the line. Ford just released a Mustang that was electric that looks really nice. There's a couple of electric pickup trucks coming that can go 250, 300 miles, which is about the distance that's when I would feel comfortable buying an electric car. It's something that I could drive to, New Hampshire and back and plug my car in at home and not have to worry about getting gas somewhere. Or if I'm going on a long trip, you'll only need to stop for lunch for a half an hour and charge it while you're there. So I think helping to build out the charging infrastructure is going to be an interesting thing, but I don't think it's going to be as big a deal as most people think, because you don't need to, nobody has a gas station at home, but your car you charge overnight while you're sleeping.
Oh, okay.
And you have a full charge every day. So as long as you're not driving more than 300 miles a day, it's not going to kill you. But I talked about in the article some of the things that we could do to increase electric charging infrastructure here. We could put a couple of public car charging spots, whether it's the town parking lot in the center, the library, town hall, the police station, something to get some public accessible charging. There are grants available, Mass EVIP grants, I think still funded from the Volkswagen settlement a couple of years ago. We'll pay for a lot of it. National Grid and Eversource for electric utilities offer grant programs to increase electric charging because, they sell the electricity to us. So they're incentivized to do that. And there were a couple of other things I mentioned that you could do to increase that. You could change some of the zoning requirements for large parking lots. So if another supermarket moved to town, we could require them to put in 10 charging spots. Or we could talk about, just finding other ways, purchasing electric vehicles for town uses. So something we've started doing the last few years in fiscal 21 and fiscal 22, we purchased hybrid police cruisers. And traditional hybrid, not the plug-in kind, but still, because the thing about police cars is when you idle them, that's when they have the most wear. But if you're idling a hybrid car, it's on electric mode most of the time. So you're not ruining the engine by just sitting it there turned on. So we see reduced maintenance costs in those two cruisers. We have lower fuel expenses. So there's a benefit all around, and purchasing them new, it's almost the same cost as a traditional internal combustion engine police car.
Good.
I think we even got grants the first time to reduce the cost. So there's a lot of things that we can start doing in this area as a town to both encourage the public to make the switch or just start doing it ourselves.
Okay, and I know you mentioned walkable areas too. What will change, or what could be changed in terms of, we have the park and we have the downtown area, but how would we increase how would we create more places for people to walk as opposed to use a car?
So, I can just use a personal example. I live off of Plymouth Street, Route 58, and there is a short stretch of Plymouth Street that I would have to walk to get to the commuter rail that doesn't have sidewalks. We could do something like add sidewalks to some of the streets that don't have them. Yeah. Main roads. That would make it a lot easier to walk around town. Whitman's already pretty walkable right now. If you live anywhere near the vicinity of the center, you can walk. But we can do things, there's grant programs like Complete Streets, which we actually were awarded one last year that's reconfiguring the area between the park and the Colebrook Cemetery to make it a little more, what do you say, pedestrian friendly. So it's going to slow cars down taking that turn rather than it being an old Y. Now you've got to actually make a turn.
Yeah.
And I think you'll see a lot of cars slow down there and people will feel safer crossing from the park to the police station. We're also seeing later this year, the center of town, we're going to redo some of the sidewalks with a shared streets grant, similar program that I think was COVID money, with the intent of getting people out walking around because that was what we could do for a year. And that the intent of this one is to slow down cars in the center. Same thing. It's going to bump out the sidewalks a little bit and increase some of the ADA accessibility, some of those sort of skid plates, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Okay. And obviously, this is the boring part. How are we going to pay for it? You said mostly with grants, right?
So a lot of it's grants. Some of the stuff will cost money, but most of them pay back in pretty short periods of time. You know, one of the things I mentioned that Whitman actually did go through with was converting our streetlights to LEDs. It was a couple $100,000 up front. It was a big upfront cost. We got some grants from the state to pay for it. There was a state grant specifically to convert streetlights to LEDs. But as part of that, we purchased the streetlights outright, where we used to, I think we leased them from Verizon, who owned the poles, or National Grid, who owned the poles, however it was. But we've completely paid back that upfront cost in less than, I think it was 3 years. We're saving a ton of money on that. And I don't know if you've walked around at night lately, but it's a lot brighter than it used to be. And all of the streetlights are on, where sometimes we used to alternate to save money.
Oh, okay. That makes a big difference in terms of safety too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
so there's a lot of things like that where just, you know, increasing the building insulation so you actually use less energy to heat the building, or things like, maintenance on police cars, things that you don't immediately think about when you see the upfront purchasing costs. The capital costs so for some of these things are higher, but if the operating costs are reduced in the long run, it saves money.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess the bigger issue that you're really working on too is the carbon emissions, because even the more solar and, you know, sustainable kinds of energy we use, it'll end up costing less overall, and we won't pollute as much, right?
Yeah, and I think you're going to see as we start applying for some of these MVP action grants to mitigate some of the effects or adapt to some of the changes we're going to see over the next few years, we're going to see some real costs. Most of them will be paid for by state grants, but some of the real costs of climate change at the local community. And it'll just emphasize that we want to put some of these investments in to offset this going forward. We don't want it to continue to get worse.
Yeah, that's important. That was incredible. Do you have anything else you'd like to share with us?
You know, we've been talking a lot about my blog post. I didn't give it a plug yet, so I guess I can do that.
Yeah.
So it's on my website, votejustinevans.com, and you can go directly to the blog, votejustinevans.com/blog. This is the most recent post up there. It was quite long. It links to all the state programs. So if you you know someone, you know, leading another municipality that's interested in doing some of these things, I highly recommend you check it out.
Okay. Thank you, Justin. It's always a pleasure to have you. It's great to see you again. And I think these goals are great. And we hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to all of our viewers in Whitman and Hanson. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.